Despite mulling over the decision to enter the transfer portal after another lackluster season with the Wolverines, Johnston stayed because of his maize and blue fandom. Everyone was thrilled at Michigan that Koch was returning for his junior season, knowing that DB had entered the NFL draft after last year with Ohio State. In the season opener, Michigan and Colton went up against Oregon State, and the Beavers, even though they were unranked, took a lead early. Jalen and Koch worked together in the offseason to get their chemistry and timing on point with routes because that had been such a glaring issue last season. The crazy thing was that despite lacking an elite college quarterback, Koch was still putting up monster numbers, although he continued to be snubbed from any wide receiver accolades. Koch's sophomore season was nearly identical statistically to his freshman season, and that was a yellow flag to some scouts. Some NFL mock drafters were projecting Koch in the third round because he hadn't showcased any growth at the position. So Colton made it clear to Jalen in spring training that he wanted to be a receiver that could run any route on the route tree. It made sense with Koch's experience as a slot receiver in high school and his freshman season that he could run any route while still being used for high point passes. Michigan responded by scoring 17 unanswered points, and Koch demonstrated that despite not being the fastest outside receiver, he still had the best 9 routes with his inside-outside double move that baited DBs into dropping in coverage for Koch to take it all the way. Despite a 24-7 lead, Michigan players and fans were stunned in the fourth quarter by a heroic comeback from the Beavers. Walls shocked fans, scouts, and teammates when he announced he would enter the NFL draft after just his sophomore year. The one person who wasn't surprised by this was Colton. Despite the bad blood, Colton was actually rooting for Walls to do well in the league, and he wanted to see where he'd end up getting drafted. Walls wouldn't be too far away from Michigan, as he would end up finding himself getting drafted in the second round to the Minnesota Vikings. Walls got his welcome to the NFL moment early in his career when he got pancaked in his first preseason game against the Dolphins. Walls got the chance to play most of the game as the projected second starting corner on the depth chart, and Walls also got the opportunity to line up for a few snaps against Tyreek Hill. One huge thing working to Bradford's advantage as an early NFL draft commit as a sophomore was that he wasn't done growing. By the time DB got his first reps in the preseason, he had grown to 6 feet tall. Walls made it through the preseason unscathed as the second starting corner on the Vikings before the regular season began, and he sat down to watch Michigan take on UNLV. Koch was mostly used as a decoy in this game, as UNLV keyed in on him while usually leaving receivers like Cornelius Johnston in one-on-ones. Perry hooked up with his other receivers and tight ends in this game, while Koch was given only a few opportunities on go balls. Michigan ended up taking care of business this time and won the game 38-0. Minnesota and Walls had their season opener against the young and upcoming Detroit Lions. Bradford enjoyed not just being the starting corner, but being drafted right after the Vikings' new franchise quarterback. Minnesota was moving on from Kirk to Louisville quarterback Spencer Rudolph. Walls was the only defensive player drafted by the Vikings in the past draft as well, and that made Walls feel even more secure in his role with the team. Walls still had the same problem of being underweight and lacking the physicality to make plays in the run game at the beginning of his rookie season, but he got the opportunity to play a lot of man coverage against one of the fastest receivers in the NFL in Jamison Williams. Walls was a much better man corner than zone, but he did a great job in the first half of baiting Goff into thinking he was playing man coverage on the slant and releasing to his nickel corner for the interception. They returned the pick to midfield, and it led to a second touchdown for the rookie quarterback Rudolph. Unfortunately, the offense would stumble the rest of the game while Detroit's offense was too much for DB and the D. The Vikings lost their first game of the year 31-14. Meanwhile, Michigan continued to stumble. They lost their third game to Utah 13-10 and then found themselves down 10-0 against Minnesota after the first quarter. While the game wasn't in Minnesota, Bradford made it clear on Twitter that he would be watching. Frustration with limited touches was building for Koch, who flattened a Minnesota safety. Michigan took a 14-10 lead before half, and in the second half, Colton had a few catches, but no targets in the end zone, and Michigan turned it around offensively and found their footing, winning while rattling off 35 points unanswered. Johnston was frustrated with his role on the offense after working all offseason with Perry to nail their chemistry. Statistically, Koch was having his worst season, averaging 80 receiving yards while pulling in just 1 touchdown through 4 games. And Crippen, his teammate at wide receiver, had more yards, catches, and touchdowns than him. Back in Minnesota, Walls was continuing to progress as a cornerback. He had significantly improved technically, and he had improved his speed and lateral quickness working with Vikings trainers. Their next game was against the Texans and CJ Stroud, who was just coming off of a Rookie of the Year campaign the previous season. The Texans were a pass-heavy offense, and DB still didn't have his first pick of his career. CJ Stroud picked on Walls early, and with the way that Stroud protected the ball, it was unlikely that Walls would get his first pick in this game. Some fans were curious as to how Walls was able to circumvent the NFL draft protocol to enter early as a sophomore. As a college athlete with really affluent parents, he was able to bend the rules of eligibility into his favor to enter the NFL draft. And typically you have to be a junior before declaring for the draft, but Walls was able to declare early with the help of the family lawyer. This may have been why Walls was such a polarizing prospect. Some GMs didn't believe he was ready for the NFL, while others, like in the case of the Vikings, loved the raw talent that he had at his age, and he fit the rebuilding timeline for the Vikings. Michigan lost their next game to Purdue at the last second when Koch couldn't get into the end zone, and Michigan couldn't snap the ball quickly enough. The following game, Jalen Perry suffered an ankle sprain, so Will Johnston got the start, and Koch instantaneously benefited from the switch. Michigan rolled to a win behind Koch's 11 catches for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Wolverines had a 3-3 record, and the fans were getting tired of this mediocrity they'd seen from the football team the last few years. Koch felt the same way, but he couldn't take one more year of playing with Jalen Perry at quarterback, who was going to start when he came back, even though Will Johnston played well. Colton was ready to enter the NFL draft. After losing to Penn State, Koch and Michigan had another game come down to the wire against Michigan State, and Koch was frustrated with double coverage all game, and with 40 seconds left, he thought he got open on a corner route to the sideline, but a State DB ripped the ball out of his hands to end the game and dropped Michigan to 3-5, and now the Wolverines had lost 3 of their last 4. The following game, Michigan played against Nebraska, and the offense came out humming early, putting up 14 before Koch took a nasty hit, which gave him a concussion. Koch ended up missing the next 2 games from that concussion, and fans were convinced that he would sit out the rest of the season because the Wolverines were playing so poorly. As I've mentioned before, quitting was simply not in Koch's DNA. It doesn't matter if it's the right financial or career decision to sit to protect from future injuries. Koch valued his legacy with Michigan and his relationship with the fans. These 3 years were brutal for Michigan football, but Koch wanted to give the fans and his family some memories from his junior season. At the same time, Bradford was facing the toughest test of his career, playing against the Niners on the road in the Bay. The Vikes had a 3-6 record, while the Niners were fighting for the 1 seed in the NFC. McCaffrey put the team on his back early with 2 big rushing touchdowns, and the 49ers were great at getting mismatches by putting Debo and McCaffrey into different alignments. The Vikings D looked lost at times, and they fell down 21-7, but Spencer Rudolph and Justin Jefferson answered with 2 more touchdowns to tie it before half. In the second half, the Niners ran a ton of crossing routes, but the Vikings defensive line was also able to get some pressure on Purdy to disrupt a couple of the passes. Walls made the play of his young NFL career by playing inside shade on a go route, baiting Purdy into a throw down to the end zone that DB was able to pick off. And while it was only the end of the third quarter, it gave the ball back to Minnesota's offense with a 7-point lead, and the Vikings would hold on to secure the W on the road. Luckily for Koch, during his absence with a concussion, his team was able to go on a 2-game winning streak, and Koch felt like he had to prove his unwavering loyalty to the fans by coming out and giving it 100% in their snow game against Iowa. Koch may very well have had the best performance of his career in this game. Jalen Perry was also back from injury, but it didn't seem to stop him from getting targets in this matchup. I don't know if it was the snow or if it was just Koch's superior athleticism, but he left DBs in the dust for those breakaway touchdowns before having the best run after the catch juke of his career, faking out 3 defenders and taking it to the house for a 3rd touchdown of more than 50 yards in the game. With a performance like that, it was impossible for Michigan not to pick up their 3rd straight win. Iowa made it close in the end, but the Wolverines won 35-30, and Koch finished with 320 receiving yards and 3 scores, which fell just 50 yards short of Michigan's single-game receiving yards record held by Jeremy Gallon. Koch's stats were starting to look more like his sophomore season, averaging 122 yards with double-digit touchdowns for a 3rd consecutive year. There was just 1 game left in the regular season, and of course that meant it would be against Ohio State, who had surprisingly fallen from their usual top 10 ranking to a 5-6 record. Even in the midst of a long season, Bradford flew out to the game in Michigan to support his Buckeyes, and before the game, DB saw Koch in the tunnel and stopped him to tell him that he's looking forward to lining up against him in the league next year. This was a big step for DB, who had just been an overt head to Koch for the past few years, and Koch felt like the only time DB would be nice to him or give him compliments is when DB felt superior to him. Whenever they were at the same level, Bradford was a different person. He wasn't a friend to Koch because he couldn't be happy for his friend's success. He was jealous whenever Koch was talked about more than him, while Koch never worried about that type of stuff. Colton was just happy to be playing the game. In the 4th, the game was still tied at 14. While Koch looked at his career at Michigan as a failure, not having gone to a single conference championship or college football playoff game, he could take heart in finishing his career with a winning record over Ohio State if they won this game. Koch got Michigan into scoring position for a touchdown, and Ohio State matched it. And then on 4th and 2, Koch made the play of the game, ad-libbing and streaking open over the middle for the tying score. Michigan scored another TD using Koch as a decoy, but missed the 2-point conversion, and Ohio State missed their conversion too. On their next possession, Ohio State settled for a field goal, and that was all the opening that Colton needed to win the game. On a drag route, Koch got separation from his defender and dove into the end zone in triple OT, and the fans rushed the stands, and it was a magical send-off game for Koch in his last game playing in front of these Michigan fans. He had another amazing performance with 16 catches for 180 yards and 2 TDs. Walls left the game early to fly back for his last game of the season at home against the Titans. DB had been in contention for Defensive Rookie of the Year up until this point, and in the final game, neither the Vikings or Titans were playing for playoff hopes. Both of them had been eliminated weeks ago, and the Vikings had a 6-10 record, but things were looking positive for the franchise after Walls and their first-round rookie quarterback, Spencer Rudolph, had exceptional seasons. Walls took his matchup for granted, though, in the last week against Treylon Burks, who punished him for pressing him at the line by burning him on a 9 route for the touchdown to take the lead. Rudolph and the offense scored yet again, and with a 4-point lead, it was up to the D to end the season on a high note, but somehow Mayfield found his receiver in single coverage in the back of the end zone, and the Vikings DB completely misplayed the ball, and the Titans got the last win of the season. Bradford finished the season with 1 interception and 87 total tackles, which is a lot for a corner. Spencer Rudolph finished with the Offensive Rookie of the Year award, and Bradford finished 8th for Defensive Rookie of the Year. Michigan got the chance to finish the season with the honor of playing a top 25 team in TCU. To get to this point, Coke and Michigan had to win 4 straight after going 3-5 in their first 8 games. After a successful season making the college football playoffs not all that long ago, TCU still had some talent on the roster, so this game wouldn't be a cakewalk for Johnston, who, despite outside counsel asking him to sit out, decided to play in this game, first for the fans and his teammates, and secondly to try to raise his draft stock. I want to remind too everyone watching that if you have a channel membership, this will be your first chance to deliver a scouting report to me to help rate Coke Johnston as he enters the NFL draft. And I'm really excited to see everyone's evaluations of the player. The ratings that you can decide on are all skill-based, meaning you won't be able to decide the player's speed, but you can decide route running, catching, and things like that. Anyways, after hauling in the 20-yard catch, Johnston was pulled off the field and watched the offense score the game-winning touchdown without him, and Michigan finished the season with a 5-game win streak and took home the Cotton Bowl. Coke had one thing left to do: declare.